You might be tempted to think that this comment is from a bot, but I actually think it's from a real MAGA voter, particularly because they misspelled Dems. So they are referencing Trump's claim in his speech before Congress that the Biden administration spent millions of dollars trying to transgender animals, particularly mice. When actually Trump, if he can even read at all, cannot read a scientific paper and doesn't understand the difference between transgender and transgenic. And because we know that narcissists can never admit when they are wrong, and because we know that Trump loves to use Goebbels, mustache man, Ministry of Propaganda techniques, including the one that says lie and lie so often that people begin to accept it as the truth. That when you get caught in a lie, you never own it. You just double down, and you gaslight the shit out of people. After Trump got owned in the press for not understanding the difference between transgender and transgenic, they put up something on whitehouse.gov. Okay, so let's just set aside for a second the fact that our federal government websites, which used to be reliable sources of data, research, historical information, documentation, are now scrubbed of all of that. And they are now incredibly embarrassing, cringe websites just used to spread propaganda of this machine and to prop up Donald Trump's fragile ego, where they use phrases like the fake news losers and embarrassingly double down on the lies. Okay, but also let's pretend for a second that you really believe what Donald Trump was referencing in his original speech is transgendering mice. Because this now official government website says the fake news losers at CNN immediately tried to fact check it, but President Trump was right, as usual. Y'all, oh God, I should not be getting such bad secondhand embarrassment reading a federal government website, but this is 2025 America. So the website references multiple studies that they use as evidence to back up Trump's claim from his speech. The claim, which they call a fact in big bold on the website, is that under the Biden administration, the NIH doled out millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded grants for institutions across the country to perform transgender experiments on mice. So basically, in an attempt to scramble after he got fact-checked on CNN, someone just searched through the NIH records and literally put in mice and hormones. And then whatever was spat out, that is what they put up on the government website as their proof. And I have talked for a long time on my YouTube channel about the importance of scientific literacy and understanding how to read a scientific paper, because the bold headlines in popular media about scientific research often misrepresent the claims made in the article, the conclusions that are drawn by the scientists from their research, from the data. Sometimes it's that the headlines make exaggerated claims, and sometimes they are making claims that are not supported, but that's not what the research was about in the first place, and it's absolutely nothing that the researchers concluded. And how easily we are kind of hoodwinked as a nation because we don't have scientific literacy, we don't know how to read a scientific paper for ourselves, and we trust what the popular press says, and now we trust what whitehouse.gov says, instead of going to the actual research and looking at it for ourselves. And I do not think it is elitist to expect that America's children, part of the high school experience, should be to learn how to read a scientific paper. It should not be something that is a skill that only biology majors develop in college, right? Everybody in high school can learn how to read a paper critically and to understand how a scientific paper is put together, how research is conducted, and how conclusions are reached. So whitehouse.gov is claiming that the Biden administration gave out almost $8 million in funding, grant money, to try to transgender mice. But if you look at what the studies are themselves, that is not what is happening at all. Right? Do we not understand by now that lab mice are a key component of health research? And if you don't understand why we use mice, just go ahead and Google, why do we use mice in lab experiments? Their short lifespan, the way that we can run generations of testing very quickly, the size, the cost effectiveness. So virtually all health research is going to include experiments with mice. But these studies that cost about $8 million, that is about how much the federal government is paying Doge every week. These studies were looking at how various hormones may positively or negatively impact various disease processes. Right, they're flipping out over a study about gonadal hormones as mediators of sex and gender influences in asthma. But that study is about asthma research and how we treat, asthma is a giant problem for kids in the United States, especially kids in urban areas with high levels of air pollution. And since Trump is dismantling the EPA and environmental protections and, the Clean Air Act, we are going to see more and more kids with asthma. Understanding how people of different genders, people with different levels of hormones, might respond differently to asthma treatments. That's important research, and it has nothing to do with transing mice. It's just that these folks flip out if you say the word sex or gender or hormones. The other studies were looking at things like HIV treatments and how different hormones might impact breast cancer risks and breast cancer treatments. As someone who lost her mother to a rare form of ovarian cancer, I had my ovaries removed to prevent ovarian cancer. And one of these studies is about how steroids, how hormones impact the ovaries. That is important research that, the Trump administration is just axing all of that. I mean, why would we want to find a cure for ovarian cancer? Why would we want to save the lives of millions of women? And as my eldest child, she came in when I was filming, what she said was, please remind your audience that there's no such thing as transgender mice at all. If you give different levels of hormones to mice in order to study what happens to their bodies, specifically whatever your research is about, if they are mice that you have infected with HIV, if you are looking at the impacts on their reproductive organs, if you're looking at, their respiratory systems and the impacts of different levels of hormones on the mice, that there still is no such thing as transgender mice. There are just mice in the lab that you are conducting studies on that happen to use hormones. Right? Like, it doesn't matter how much estrogen in these studies or what level of steroids that you pump in to these mice, you are not going to trans them. You are not going to make them transgender. And as Ruth pointed out as well, part of the reason that these studies, these grants were so large is because running labs is expensive. So much of the funding of these grants is just to make sure that the lab keeps running. Do you know how much it costs to run a fume hood every year? Do you know how much lab supplies are? And the NIH understands that when they give out grants, it can't just be for the specific study. The lab also has to stay operational or they can't conduct the studies. And labs are full of very expensive equipment that is expensive to create, to maintain, and the electricity and water usage, etc., are often very high. Right? Like, that is the cost of doing health research to find treatments and cures for diseases that Americans are suffering from. And all of this is being obliterated by the Trump regime. It's not about transing mice. And again, $8 million is a tiny drop in the bucket. But studies like these are vital health research that helps us develop treatments and cures. And I know Jamel said this the other day, and I totally agree. We don't yet fully understand how far back this regime has already set us. They've set us back decades in science research, decades in trying to find cures for diseases. Ending these experiments kills people. It kills people, and it creates tremendous suffering. And we are not going to see fully the extent of that for many years, as there will be fallout for years and years and years. And vilifying science, vilifying scientific research is a classic technique of fascist regimes. Demonizing the very institutions that improve our quality of life, like the Department of Education, like our libraries, which are currently under attack, like scientific research like the NIH, even things like NOAA that does our weather forecasting, vilifying all those and making it sound like they are just wasting government money when they are actually providing necessary services for us that dramatically improve our quality of life and keep our society going. That is part of the fascist tactic that we are seeing play out right now. And let us never, never forget that all of these programs, this health research, things that find treatments and cures, things that improve the quality of life for every American, keep us safer and healthier, all of these are being cut so that the wealthiest Americans can have more money in their pocketbook. All of this is being done. All of this suffering is being inflicted upon us so that the richest people in America can have a fatter wallet. That's it. Well, and also so that we are weaker and we are less healthy and we are easier to control. But please understand, there was never any transing of the mice. That was never a thing. But also, it's probably hopeless to try and debate with MAGA because they live in a different reality. They obviously believe the propaganda. It works really well on them. And Trump said he loves the uneducated. He wants to make sure that nobody understands how to think critically or read a scientific paper ever again, because then they're much easier to control. Which is why I will say that I don't think our best use of energy is trying to convert MAGA. We don't actually need the 22.7% of folks who voted for him in order to protect our democracy. I wouldn't say someone is entirely a lost cause if they truly believe that they're transing mice with our tax dollars, but I'm not going to waste my energy on this anymore.